It was a sultry late afternoon in the city. The sky, tinged with shades of orange and red, made the horizon look like it was on fire, as Maya Thompson carefully observed her surroundings. Dressed in simple, understated clothing, she blended easily into the low-income neighborhood where she worked. Despite her calm appearance, her heart was pounding. As an FBI agent, going undercover to investigate a network of police corruption, her every move had to be calculated, every step silent. She had been there for weeks, watching carefully, waiting for the right moment to act. She knew the main target of the investigation was close to falling, but undercover work required patience. And patience was something Maya had learned over the years, both in work and in life, especially when dealing with the racism and prejudice that always tried to undermine her path. Suddenly, the sound of sirens cut through the air. 2 police cars sped past, stopping abruptly at the corner. Maya, still keeping an eye on her target, realized something was about to happen, but before she could react, a tall, burly police officer approached her. "Hey you." His voice carried a cold, almost indifferent authority. John Baker. His name was well known to Maya, a white cop with a record stained with complaints about abuse of power and racism. And here he was, staring at her with contempt. Maya remained calm. She knew that for the mission, she needed to follow the rules and not get involved in the provocations. "Is there a problem, officer?" Baker stepped closer, eyes narrowed, assessing her as if he were judging his own version of justice. "What are you doing here?" he asked, crossing his arms. His posture indicated that he had already made up his own mind about her. "I'm just passing through," Maya replied, trying to keep her tone neutral. But Baker wasn't satisfied. His voice grew more aggressive, the racist tone easily emerging. "Passing through? Huh? In this neighborhood? A woman like you? I bet she's involved in something illegal." Maya's blood boiled, but she knew she couldn't afford to answer as she wanted. This was a trap. She took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. "I'm here for work," she said calmly. "Work? What kind of work?" Baker gave a short laugh, scoffing at the idea. "Let's see about that. Show me your identification." Maya, hesitant, knew that showing her FBI badge would reveal her true identity, compromising her mission. But Baker's behavior was escalating too quickly. There was no choice. With controlled movements, she took out her ID card and handed it to him. When Baker looked at the badge, instead of backing away, he laughed again, louder this time. "FBI? This has got to be a joke. You think you can walk around with that?" "It's not a joke," Maya replied firmly. "I'm an agent." But Baker had already decided what to do. "You're trying to trick me with fake documents. Do you think you can pass yourself off as someone important just because you're carrying these?" He stepped closer, showing no sign of respect. "You're under arrest." Before Maya could react, she felt the handcuffs tighten around her wrists. People around her began to watch the scene, some murmuring, others simply watching in silence. The public humiliation was palpable. She, a federal agent, was being unfairly handcuffed by a biased police officer. Baker's gaze was cold, full of contempt, as he pushed her toward the police car. Maya, with no other choice, remained silent. She knew that what came next would define much more than just this arrest. The interior of the police station was a gloomy environment, permeated by the smell of sweat and stale coffee. The fluorescent lights flickered, giving the place an even more oppressive atmosphere. Maya, now handcuffed and sitting in an uncomfortable chair, felt the eyes of the other officers on her. Murmurs echoed around her, while some seemed to be amused by the situation. She was the intruder here, a black woman, accused of forgery of documents, but deep down, Maya knew that the color of her skin weighed more than any false accusation. Baker was leaning against a table in the back, his arms crossed and a satisfied smile on his face. He still didn't believe Maya was who she said she was, even though she had shown him her authentic FBI badge. How can someone like that be FBI? Baker muttered to a colleague, not caring whether Maya heard or not. The other officer nodded without question. Maya took a deep breath, struggling to maintain control. Every second she spent there, being looked at with contempt, made her patience grow thin. She could have solved everything with a phone call to her superiors, but her secret mission prevented her from acting so directly. There was more at stake. Her silence, as painful as it was necessary at that moment. "Your documents are fake, my dear." Baker approached her again, waving the badge in his hand playfully. "We're going to keep you here for a while until we verify this story. Maybe you'll learn not to lie." "I told you, I'm a federal agent," Maya repeated, her voice firm but controlled. This was no time to lose her temper, no matter how humiliating it all was. Sure. We've heard that one before," he said, completely ignoring her. He shoved her into a small temporary cell at the police station, locking her in like she was a common criminal. From the other side of the bars, Baker looked at her with a mixture of arrogance and amusement. To him, Maya was just another person he could humiliate without consequences. The power he thought he had over her was intoxicating. But what Baker didn't know was that his arrogance and prejudice were about to cost him dearly. In the cell, Maya sat on the cold bench, the echo of the metal doors resounding in the small room. The silence was unsettling, but it also gave her time to reflect. She thought about the irony of the situation. Here she was, a woman who had dedicated her life to justice, being a victim of the very system she had sworn to protect. Her emotions swung between anger and frustration, but Maya knew she couldn't let it consume her. Instead, she focused on her larger mission. The corruption she was investigating went far beyond this moment, and Baker was just another piece in a puzzle she was about to unravel. As time passed, Maya knew that her patience would be her greatest weapon. She waited calmly, knowing that her moment would come, and when it did, justice would be served, in a way that Baker could never have imagined. Hours passed. The cold, austere atmosphere of the cell made each minute seem like an eternity, but Maya, with the calm she had cultivated during years of service in the FBI, remained steadfast. She knew that her team would soon notice her absence and that the truth would come out. However, what kept her alert was the opportunity to unmask Baker and the corrupt system he represented. As she waited, she listened to footsteps in the hallway, each one bringing a new wave of anxiety, but also a hint of anticipation. Finally, Baker's heavy footsteps echoed across the concrete floor. He was accompanied by another officer, Captain Wilson, an older man with a tired expression who seemed to carry the weight of years of service in his eyes. "So what do we have here?" Wilson asked, casting a quick glance at Maya through the bars. "She says she's FBI," Baker replied, in an ironic tone, still holding her badge as if it were a bad joke. "But I've seen better fakes." The captain frowned, taking the badge from Baker's hand. He examined it carefully, his eyes growing harder by the second. "Have you checked this?" Wilson asked, his voice heavy with a seriousness that Baker didn't seem to catch. "I was about to do that," Baker replied evasively, as if he hadn't expected the situation to go this far. Wilson gave Baker a stern look before turning to Maya. "If you really are who you say you are, this is going to cause serious problems." Very serious problems. Maya, firm and resolute, met the captain's gaze without looking away. "I'm a federal agent, and you know it. My badge is real. I'm on an undercover mission, and you've compromised that. But there's something bigger going on here, Captain. Your precinct is under investigation for corruption, and Baker is part of it." The captain was silent for a few moments, absorbing what he had just heard. He had known there was trouble at the station, but he had never imagined that an FBI agent would be involved in investigating his own officers. Baker, visibly uncomfortable, took a step back. "This is ridiculous. She's making it up." His voice now carried a slight tremor, something that had not been noticeable before. Wilson looked at Maya again, assessing the situation. "If you really are who you say you are, how do I know you're not here to damage the reputation of this precinct?" His question was direct, but his tone made it clear he was having second thoughts. Maya, sensing the tension in the air, calmly replied, "Check your badge. Call my superiors. I have proof of Baker's involvement in the scheme I'm investigating. The truth is all there." The captain, now more alert than before, nodded. "I'll check on that now. If you're lying, you won't be getting out of here anytime soon." He gave Baker one last hard look before leaving the room, the weight of the situation starting to set in. With Wilson out of the room, Baker turned pale. He knew his actions were beginning to be unmasked, but his arrogance prevented him from admitting the truth. Maya, on the other hand, waited calmly, knowing that the revelation was about to change the game completely. As Maya waited in her cell, the silence in the police station became almost unbearable. She knew that the fate of her mission, and perhaps even her career, lay in Captain Wilson's hands. If he did the right thing, he would verify her credentials and everything would be cleared up. But there was always the risk that he might be part of the corruption she was investigating. The uncertainty kept her on her toes. Outside, the minutes dragged by. Maya could hear muffled voices coming from the office, the sound of phones being dialed, and then the prolonged silence. She knew that by now the truth was being confirmed. She took a deep breath, standing up straight. This wasn't just about her freedom, but also about the opportunity to expose Baker and the corrupt system he helped protect. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway again. This time, it wasn't just Baker. Captain Wilson reappeared, his expression even more somber than before. Maya knew he had figured it all out. Behind him, a third officer, clearly of a higher rank, watched the scene with a serious expression. It was the FBI agent Maya had requested throughout her mission. He was there to clean up the situation. "Miss Thompson," Wilson said, unlocking the cell with steady hands, but his voice now held a respectful tone. "It seems you're right. I've confirmed your credentials. You are indeed an FBI agent." Maya stood calmly, maintaining her dignity despite everything she had been through. She looked at Baker, who was now pale and visibly disconcerted. The tension between the two was palpable. "So," Wilson continued, still trying to understand the full extent of the problem, "do you want to tell me what exactly is going on here?" The FBI agent accompanying the captain took the lead. Maya was on an undercover operation investigating a corruption scheme in this precinct. John Baker, among others, is being investigated for racketeering, institutionalized racism, and abuse of power. His arrest was an attempt to silence someone who was close to unmasking him. Baker tried to protest. "That's absurd. I didn't know she was FBI." But the panic in his voice gave away his guilt. Maya, without taking her eyes off Baker, spoke firmly. "Not only did you know, but you ignored all the evidence. You arrested me because you couldn't stand the idea of a black woman being more powerful than you. But now, Baker, justice will be served." The superior approached Baker, placing his hand on the officer's shoulder. "You'd better keep quiet now. There's an investigation underway, and from what I hear, the evidence against you is solid." Baker, unable to contain himself, gave Maya one last hateful look before he was escorted away. The power he thought he had crumbled before him as Maya watched, knowing that despite the humiliation, the moment of truth had finally arrived. Captain Wilson, now calmer, looked at Maya and shook his head. "I didn't realize so much was happening right under my nose. I will cooperate with the investigation. And, Agent Thompson, my sincere apologies for this situation." Maya nodded, accepting the apology without rancor. She knew her fight was far from over, but at that moment, she had achieved an important victory. The station was now silent, almost as if the weight of the truth that had just emerged had fallen upon everyone. Maya walked down the hallway, her head held high, feeling the lightness of someone who had done her duty despite the humiliation and obstacles she had faced. The senior officer overseeing the situation stood beside her, sharing a brief look of approval. Across the way, Baker was being led toward an interrogation room. The arrogance and contempt he had displayed hours before had dissipated, replaced by a blank, desolate expression. His downfall had been swift and brutal, but it was completely deserved. He, who had so often thought himself above the law, was about to face the consequences of his own actions. Maya, still processing the series of events, took a deep breath. Despite the feeling of triumph, a part of her soul was weary. She had seen corruption up close many times before, but this experience, where she had been directly hit by racism and abuse of power, had left scars deeper than any previous operation. She walked to the office where Captain Wilson was waiting for her. His expression was one of a mixture of guilt and shame. He knew he had failed as a leader, and that the system he oversaw was corrupt from within. However, there was a chance for redemption for him, and Maya was willing to acknowledge it. Agent Thompson, I know nothing I say will ever erase what happened today, Wilson began, his voice thick with regret. But I want you to know that we will do everything we can to make this right. Baker and anyone else involved will be investigated. I will not allow this mess to continue on my watch. Maya stared at him for a moment, considering his words. What happened here today is a reflection of something much bigger. You have an opportunity now to change things, but it can't just be about punishing Baker. The system is broken, and you need to start fixing it. Wilson nodded, understanding the weight of what Maya was saying. You have my word. We'll do whatever it takes. With that, Maya prepared to leave. She had successfully accomplished her mission, unmasked a corrupt police officer, and helped start a process that would hopefully reform the police department. But she knew that her fight against injustice, prejudice, and racism did not end there. As she headed for the exit, her thoughts returned to the hardships she had faced, the humiliation she had suffered, the unjust imprisonment. It had all been painful, but she would not let those moments define her. On the contrary, each adversity only strengthened her determination to continue her mission, to be an agent of change. As she walked through the doors of the police station, the sunlight touched her face, and for a brief moment, Maya closed her eyes, feeling completely free. She was a strong, resilient woman who had overcome not only the injustice of that day, but also the countless barriers imposed by racism and inequality throughout her life. The battle was far from over, but at that moment, Maya knew she had won one of the most important battles of her career.